Hey, everybody. I am Kutter,
Hey, I'm Jasmine.
and we are the hosts of the all new podcast,
In
In
real
Real
life.
Life with
Jasmine.
and Kutter.
Yeah.
We are also have the pleasure of hosting this post screening conversation on Summer of Soul. So we're super jazzed about that. And what's interesting is, I think when we first started talking about our new podcast, I told Jasmine, here's what I think we should do. We should do a podcast about film and television, but not just about specific TV shows or movies, but about how they relate to real life.
Everything.
Yeah.
So religion and music and politics and faith and culture and like all the things.
Everything that you and I and most of us deal with on a day-to-day basis. And as we were mapping out this idea, I stopped and I asked Jasmine, I said, is that too much?
And I was like, no.
Yeah.
No.
And I think I want to let the world know that you are, in fact, a genius because
thanks.
Right out of the gate, right after we came up with this idea, we came upon this movie, Summer of Soul, which premiered at Sundance, won the Grand Jury Prize and the Audience Award by Questlove, his directorial debut. And really, it does everything. It does all the things that we were interested in. It engages film. It engages music, pop culture, race, politics, faith, religion, family. I mean, just everything that you could possibly imagine, all into this documentary. And so we're really excited to be able to talk about this film. And then also here in just a minute, interview Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr., who were the lead for The Fifth Dimension, which you just saw in the film. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you a couple things, Jasmine, and mainly that is, as a storyteller yourself, who is at times the star of stage and screen, but also as a mom of 3 young kids, a Black woman who's telling stories in this sort of space, and a person of deep religious conviction. As you watched this film, what were some of the first things that stood out to you and were really significant for you?
I would say one of the first things that stood out was just this space that they were in, like as a Black woman, as a Black person, thinking about just the venue, the amount of Black people in this one space within their own neighborhood, right? It just felt so powerful, right? It felt like a sacred space that they could be in and celebrate all of this Black art, Black excellence. That was the first thing that stood out to me. What about you?
Well, I think probably more than anything else, I think we've talked to you and I about my history of knowledge of Juneteenth.
Oh,
have I told you about this? Well, I grew up in Texas, and it wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm almost 42, that I haven't heard of Juneteenth.
Which is crazy, right? That should have been part of your like school education, if in no other state.
Exactly. And in Texas, they're like, we take pride in our state. I mean, I've had Texas state history alongside, and I realized there's a lot of sort of shame on my own part of going, why didn't I know about this? What was my fault? What wasn't? And so a similar thing with this movie, I go, why haven't I known about this? Like, why is this the first that I'm coming to an awareness of this significant cultural festival that took place the same year and right near Woodstock? And I've got multiple like CDs back. Those are compact discs, things that used to contain music. Of Woodstock, and I've seen different documentaries on it, and part of it, I was just like really struck by the fact that for some reason, this festival that had huge names, these weren't like secondary
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder. I mean, my goodness, BB King. I mean, like, it's amazing the amount of people and the headliners they had, and yet this is the first I was really made aware of this at all.
Well, you know what? I often have to feel like when I start to feel the same guilt, like, why didn't I'm a Black person. And so I really like take on a lot of that guilt and say like, why didn't I know about this? Like, why did I know about so much of this history that I feel like I should know? I often just take a moment and say, you know what? Whiteness was pushed on all of us, right? Like it's pushed on all of us. It's what we're taught. This is America, right? It's what we're taught. It's all that we're meant to see and believe. And so I try to give myself a little grace to say, you know what? That's what we were meant to see. That's all we were meant to see. But now we can, dig these things up and see what's happening. So I'm so glad that Questlove had the opportunity to make this documentary and actually uncover the Black Woodstock, essentially.
Yeah. And one one at one point in the film, they're interviewing people because the moon landing, and they're asking different people there. And I remember you saying at some point a weird sort of parallel between then and now as it relates to like white people's or the white fascination with space travel.
Totally. Yeah. Even when they started talking about that, before the newscaster went out into the crowd and started asking them, I already started rolling my eyes. The moment they brought up the moon landing, I started rolling my eyes and I thought, oh, okay, here we go. Like, here we go. All the little luxuries in life for the privileged, right? Like here we are in the middle of Harlem with all that's going on, with all that people are facing in terms of murders and poverty and discrimination and hunger and all of these things. Yet the moon landing is supposed to be this monumental thing that we were all meant to celebrate. There's something that one guy says in there where he says, I just feel like we're all one step closer today. And I thought to myself, who is a step closer? Like, who is a step closer to whom? Like, I will feel closer to you when you actually believe that what brings us a step closer is actually caring about all humans before we start looking at stars, right?
Yeah.
Like,
wow, that's interesting. And all the while, this may be metaphorical, having the stars of our lives on stage, right? So there's these different ways in which we're fascinated with the stars. Both culturally and space-wise.
I like that, right? It's like those audience members, right, are looking at their stars, right? They're the people who are singing what they're feeling and experiencing, right? Rather than the luxury of looking at this mystical, outer space is beautiful, right? But it just, when it becomes the focus and when all the resources get diverted in that direction, that's when it becomes problematic.
Well, it's an interesting connection too, between, for example, different sort of church practices and sensibilities, and then also the performance arts, right? So what you have here, at least it felt to me like, because of that, because these are our stars, our exemplars, and yet the people in the audience looked and had similar experiences to those stars. It seemed like there was a deeper sort of connection. It wasn't so distant. Whereas if you went to a concert of somebody else that was at Woodstock. Who was at Woodstock?
I don't know. Let's just imagine. Let's just imagine that Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney. Okay, yeah. So a largely white audience with white stars. There is much more of a distancing, a separation. It's a performance for like an observant audience.
Right.
But it's different than you're voicing my like concrete lived experience, and that seemed to be part of what was going on here at this festival. That is sort of distinct from some of the things I've experienced.
Totally. Actually, like maybe a better example would be like Jimi Hendrix or something, right? So like, it's almost like watching an animal in a zoo in a sense, in that there's this distance, right? Like if there's a Black person on stage, and concerts by Black artists are highly dominated by white audiences in general, right? In the same way that CDs, albums were often more so like purchased by white listeners, right? A lot of that is just about resources. So it was interesting to see that, what you said, what felt different was this energy. It was like this shared energy going back and forth between the stage and the audience versus watching a show.
Yeah. And then of course, what we do know from Woodstock, there was a kind of energy there. It was of a different sort, of a different kind, right?
You know what, actually, now that you say that though, one of my favorite parts was watching some of the audience members. I don't know if you noticed that, but every so often you'd see an audience member and they'd be like,
oh yeah.
Like, it was so 60s. You're like, oh my gosh, I love that person. That was, I would say, top 3 parts.
Oh, that's funny. It just seemed like there was less sort of topless mudsliding.
I didn't notice any topless mudsliding.
I feel like that's something that I have of Woodstock. There's some moment where it like rains and they all get in the mud, and then it's a very
well, for these Black audience members, there was something that someone said that they were like, it was the smell of Afro sheet and fried chicken. And they're like, it was just like being at a gigantic Black barbecue, right? And at a gigantic Black barbecue, you do have Uncle Larry who's drunk in the corner, but there's no mudsliding and
Well, and you also have, and this I thought really stood out to me, lots and lots and lots of gospel music.
Oh my gosh,
which is really interesting, and we'll talk to Marilyn and Billy about this. But I was just really struck by not just the narrative of the film sort of turned on the prominence of gospel artists, but how sort of part and parcel to the whole thing. There was no real separation between Nina Simone and the gospel singers, the choirs, literal gospel choirs that come out and are singing "Oh Happy Day."
Right.
And that, I think, set a different kind of tone than you would have seen at some other cultural festival. So what do you make of that in terms of like that gospel influence?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine the same sort of setup at like Coachella, where you hear like these Christian artists, right, from Nashville, like on stage with
literal church choirs,
where there was no like, okay, now here comes our gospel section. Just seamlessly integrated into what was being presented. And I think that's really a picture of what Black culture is, right? Like as Black people, we have traditionally been very comfortable holding on to the gospel, right? Holding on to the gospel and making that integrated into our faith in a way that we don't have to separate and say, here's our rap and hip hop, here's our soul, here's our jazz, here's our blues. They're all influenced by one another. And almost every Black artist that was probably on that stage was in some way influenced by gospel music. And so I loved that they just incorporated it in that way. And I think it speaks so much to the Black experience.
And you get, now you fast forward and you have the Lecraes of the world and whatnot, who, same thing, just a seamless sort of blending of their musicianship, their faith, and all its complexity. And the other part that was really striking was the gospel musicians talking about how, because we're describing, they had doors open to them that other musicians might not have, and yet their own sort of church religious members were uncomfortable with where they would go with the gospel, essentially. Right.
There was the one woman who was speaking from the Edwin Hawkins gospel choir. And something that stuck out to me was she said, we came from the Pentecostal faith and we weren't accepted by our own faith, because Pentecostals aren't meant to drink or dance or sing, go to clubs and sing. And although they saw, as Edwin Hawkins saw that as, okay, we're going to go do ministry in all the places we're meant to do ministry, not, outside of the walls of our church. And I just found it interesting that it's like, as Christians, we often say, don't go there, don't say that, don't speak to those people, don't associate with those people. And we cannot find that anywhere in the gospel of Jesus. It doesn't exist.
It's the exact opposite. In fact, it's Jesus saying it's not, what goes into the person that defiles them, it's what comes out. You have Paul saying, I will become all things to all people for the sake of the gospel. And it really is a challenge, I think. And then back to, the race side of it for specifically white Christians, because they often operate, I often operate with these clear distinctions between what is holy and what is unholy, what is sacred, what is profane, where the limits of the gospel, right? And what we see here is a really great demonstration of the power of music, but then also the power of the gospel itself to breathe life into all sorts of different contexts. So we're super jazzed to talk about this and more with Marilyn and Billy, who were there and have their own new project actually coming up. And so we're going to welcome them in and talk to them a little bit about Summer of Soul. Well, welcome to our post-screening conversation and the very first episode of our new podcast called In Real Life.
Yes.
I'm Kutter.
I'm Jasmine.
And what do we call you? What's the appropriate way to refer to the two of you? The first and second of the five dimensions? Marilyn and Billy, what do you prefer?
Queen.
Actually, we just prefer Marilyn and Billy.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to talk about not only the new documentary Summer of Soul, but also your upcoming project that we'll get to here in just a second. But before we get going onto that, we're going to start with a question, I think, about your experience of this monumental cultural moment. So Jasmine, you want to lead us off here?
Yeah, it was fascinating watching this footage, I guess, as we all have for the first time, right? And
yes,
that really stood out to me was when Marilyn, you said that you have always thought about, like, how do you color a sound, right? How do you color a sound? And Billy, you mentioned, they thought of us as a white act until they saw, this hot air balloon picture that they showed. And what I found fascinating was that in this time and with these parameters, right, that you were meant to fit within, that you never allowed yourself to get boxed into that. You never said, oh, we have to be this or we have to be that, right? You allowed yourself to be influenced by pop, psychedelic, soul, jazz, all of these influences without feeling that you had to be boxed in. And in a lot of ways, I felt like you're pioneers in that. It doesn't seem like what was typical at that time. And so did you think of yourselves as pioneers at that time? And do you think of yourselves as pioneers now?
Well, I would say yes, in a way, because when we got together as a group, we got together as friends and with voices, and all of us were into different types of music. We just wasn't into R&B music, which was considered Black music at the time, And so we enjoyed all music, and then when we started putting it together, with what we heard in our hearts and in our minds. And so we came up with that sound, and so that's the sound that you hear when you hear Up and Away and all those other records that went pop, that we would say in the music business. And a lot of people thought we were a white group.
We kind of allowed our own individual sounds to dictate the direction that we would go in addition to the kind of music that we enjoyed singing and hearing. Like Billy came from a gospel background, and in many ways, gospel and R&B. I was always, I never thought of my sound as a label, but people always said that I didn't sound like I came from the church. And so they thought that I was more of a pop singer, and I did enjoy pop music. And it was something that came naturally to me. Now, Florence also came from a pop background. Lamont was more involved in jazz, and Ronald actually enjoyed opera.
Oh.
But we all enjoyed music of all types, and so we allowed the music or the song that we heard, and if we wanted to do that song, we allowed that to dictate the direction in which we would go.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you said, Billy, you had more of a background in gospel. Yeah. What struck me about this movie, and I guess the event as a whole, so assuming Questlove captured what really happened, I was really struck by the prominence of gospel music throughout. But then even as the narrative of the film, it like hinged upon all of these gospel choirs coming in. As you think about your own sort of music, both then and now, can you say a little bit about that influence? And maybe not just of gospel music as a genre, but maybe the gospel. How did faith and the church and the community of faith inform your creative work at that time, and has it continued to inform your work now?
Yes, I would say yes on that question, because we are what you call back in the day church people, and we grew up in church. At least I did. I know Marilyn's family did attend church, and so we've always been pretty well faith based. So for gospel to be a part of us, it kind of, how can I say it? It kind of was a part of the group all at the same time. And even today, we're saved, we're Christians, and we have a ministry called Soldiers for the Second Coming, and so we're definitely interfaith based music. And so that's always been a part of our sound.
Mm-hmm. And you've never, going back to the fact that you've never limited yourself or felt like you needed to go in any particular box. With this new album, Blackbird, you've chosen to go in the direction of all Beatles songs, which I find fascinating. And as I listen through them, I'm like, I've never heard them in this way. I've never, there were lyrics that I had missed that I felt like, oh, you're just speaking to me in a whole nother way that I haven't heard, even though these songs are so well known. And I thought that you did that beautifully. Why did you choose the Beatles?
Well, we like the Beatles music. And one thing that was very appealing to us is that we felt that the Beatles, they wrote great lyrics, and the music form was such that we could approach it in a different way. It didn't have to be done the same way. And we liked that idea. And we liked the idea of what the Beatles music was saying, like Blackbird and the power of that lyric of, this particular project was appealing to us because we felt like this was a message that needed to be heard at this time in our culture. This is at this time in our country's lives that, there's been so much division, and we need to start learning to appreciate one another and respect one another's backgrounds. Our backgrounds are different. That's what makes the United States such a special country, is that we all have come from different places, but yet we come together and we bring so much culture and so much influence into one another's lives. And we need to appreciate that and approach it in a more of a discovery experience. And that's one thing that we liked about the message in Blackbird.
Yeah, but the Beatles, should I say, John and Paul basically wrote that as a civil rights anthem, because they were talking about rights, and we use it as a human rights movement, for what we're trying to do and trying to close the division that's happening in our country. But like you were saying, like Marilyn was saying, yes, the Beatles have, I think when they were young and writing all these beautiful songs and messages in the songs, and for us to be able to take those songs today and sing them from the experience of so many years that we have gained, so we're able to take them in a different way with the meaning that maybe they couldn't give it, maybe that would have to come from us, and so that's what we did.
We also love we love where this young culture, the younger people are coming from today. And they're more into human rights. And they are more into, when they see something that they don't think is right, they protest it.
Yeah.
And we were touched by that. And we said, we think that this music and this direction is something that will appeal not only to us at our age, in our age bracket, but it'll also touch and appeal
the 20 to 25-year-old bracket. Is that?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get it out.
We are. It's been 45 years since we've had a record on the Billboard charts, and
That's
we're
right.
pretty excited about that.
Yes.
But we didn't do it with that idea in mind. We just wanted to sing music and messages that we thought would appeal to the market. And we have a wonderful young producer, Nick Mendoza, who comes from that group as well.
We call him our millennial producer.
Yeah.
And when we talked about direction and ideas, it just seemed like the way to go.
Well, I'm not a good musician, but that's my and there are moves that like the Beatles make musically that have always just blown me away. I listen to it and I'm like, man, what would it have been like to first imagine that sequence or that transition? And so I'm super interested in you sort of reimagining that for a new age, in part because I think the best music or the best art just in general is art that endures, that can address the new changing circumstances just as effectively as when it was originally created. And what it makes me think in terms of your then interest in human rights and social justice, there's clearly obviously parallels between what you were doing and singing back in '69 and now in 2021.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could say a little bit, because you're musicians, this is your craft. It makes certain sense. It's kind of obvious, but I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you imagine music, whether it's the Beatles music, the Beatles remixed music, or even your music back in the '60s, the possibility of it prompting or promoting social change. Is that something that you feel more encouraged now, looking back over the past 45 years? Are you cynical about it? Are you hopeful about it? Where is music going, music and the arts, in terms of helping push us toward these basic human rights?
I think we're more hopeful about it. And I think that this film that Questlove has put together is going to do a lot for the people who come to see it. Because again, it's going to appeal to people of all age groups, hearing the music, seeing the togetherness, seeing the possibilities that come from music, because music is supposed to, we always felt like the Lord made music to give us hope and love and happiness, and those are the things that we look for, and that's certainly the things that's in Summer of Soul, you know.
Yes, one of the most incredible things about this is that for this particular film, this footage was hidden away for over 50 years.
Right.
And it was filmed in 1969 during the same time when Woodstock was happening.
Right.
And Woodstock got a lot of publicity, and this film was just put away for over
buried.
50 years.
Yeah.
And both of them were right there in New York. One was up in the Catskill Mountains, and the other was
in Harlem.
Was in Harlem, you know, and it was quite naturally, you know, that Harlem was a lot of Black people. So, but the film was hidden for 50 years, and Questlove had the opportunity to recover that film and made a documentary out of it. And now it will become a part of we don't like to say Black history. It becomes a part of American history.
It is American
because
history.
it is American history. All of us are immigrants in this country, and it becomes American history.
Yeah, I felt like there were so many parallels. Like, even though I obviously was not alive at that time or there, you know, well, maybe not obviously. I look older than
so what did you feel? What did you feel?
So I wasn't alive then. Surprise, surprise.
Jasmine, we weren't there either.
Speak for yourself, young.
What I found fascinating is I still felt so connected to it, right?
Wow.
Even as a Black woman in 2021, I still felt this deep connection as though I was there. I still felt like I could be standing there, that I could be there with my family and listening to this music and participating in this energy, this joy, this celebration of Black excellence, right in the middle of Harlem. And so I just kept thinking about all the parallels through, whether it was, you know, the unfortunate parallels of our leaders being murdered,
yes,
or the parallels of the way that we feel when we are all together in that way, in that space that becomes a sacred space of us being all together, being able to express ourselves in ways that we can't feel quite as free in other spaces.
Right. You know, was one of the most incredible things about that whole festival was there were no fights, there was no arguments, there was no bottle throwing, there was just only peace and people loving, singing and harmony, and they just had a ball.
Yeah,
because
great outfits.
a lot of these people,
Great outfits, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I said there were also great outfits.
Oh, yeah, well, of course, that comes along with the performance.
That goes along with it. I was like, every man, woman, and child, I was like, can I just get a whole little wardrobe? Things have been saved. Yeah.
You know what was so beautiful about it? It was that the expectation of the
crowd.
faces,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
the kids, their parents, just every age group that was out there, they knew they were going to see something special.
Mm-hmm.
And when they heard the music, they were so excited, and it was, it just made you cry because it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just,
and that was
awesome.
years ago when we were all young, and you see that footage, and a lot of those people are not with us now, but a lot of those people became major stars in this country, in the country of America, right?
Yeah, that struck me as how I don't think I'd seen him on video so young was Stevie Wonder.
Yes,
wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, it was like a little baby, right?
I know it. Yeah,
and Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah, right.
Gladys Knight looked like a little girl.
I know. And then some of them aren't with us anymore.
No,
BB King is no
King,
longer with us.
Nina Simone.
That's right. But I mean, they're just some of the great talent of that time being captured in such a special way. Talk about it's our culture right there.
And speaking of gospel choirs, my cousins, I didn't even know that they were singing with the Edwin Hawkins singers, and all of a sudden they just appeared in New York. And what are you guys doing here? Well, we with the Edwin Hawkins singers. I said, what?
I know. When I heard you say that, I thought, man, some families are just blessed with all the vocal cords.
Well, I was sharing with Jasmine earlier about feeling somewhat shameful of not being aware of this significant moment in musical history, and yet being incredibly aware of Woodstock, right? How disparate those are. And as I watched this, just getting to what you're saying of like how beautiful it was, how captivating, how peaceful it was. But for me, like you're saying, feeling like you would be at home there. I've seen lots of footage of Woodstock. I would not I have young kids. I would not take my family and young kids to Woodstock. I would have taken them to this, right?
Right. Yeah.
The difference in just tone, the tonal difference is so stark. Go ahead.
There were a few white people sprinkled in and out.
Yes, they were. They were mixed in there.
They just came out there and they were just enjoying the music with everybody else.
It was just a special time of special music, and it was, and boy, I mean, Questlove really, really shows that in his film. It's
beautiful.
It's not nothing to be ashamed of that you didn't know about it, because things are hidden a lot on the history of the people that's in this country.
Yes.
And it's if you don't know, you don't know, But the whole thing is that's why we need to know what each other are doing, so it can be a part of our American history.
Yes. Yeah. Very well said. I feel like the American narrative is very very carefully curated, right? Like we know what we've been, told, what we've been allowed to know, the narrative that we're supposed to know. So I was telling Kutter earlier that even as a Black woman, when I find out things that I feel like, oh gosh, this is pulling my Black card, I don't even know this or that, the other, I give myself the grace to say, well, that was intentional. I wasn't meant to know these things, right? They were covered up. And so with this, I'm just so thankful that Questlove had this opportunity to make this beautiful film and to expose this amazing history to become part of the American narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things is that, like what you were saying, Jasmine, was the episode that happened in Tulsa, and that about the burning of the Black Wall Street.
Yes.
There was a young man that I saw on footage where he said, when they first found out about it, he said, I lived here all of my life, right there and where it happened. He said, and I never even heard anything about it.
Wow.
But and they were trying to explain to him what had happened in this town. Now, history becomes his story. You know, and long as you can tell tell his story, then it's not the whole story. It's just his story.
Yes.
But you know, the Lord's not going to allow that.
No.
And I feel like the Lord waited for such a time as this,
right.
that he can show through various projects like Questlove's Summer of Soul, like our recording of Blackbird. It shows how we can be brought together.
Yeah.
We just need to know more about one another.
Right.
We need to know how we share so much. You know, there's so much that we have that is of interest to each other.
Right.
And the Lord, that's the way he meant for it to be.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be separated.
Right.
Like we have been. It's
right.
a time like this to bring all of us together.
Right.
Exactly.
And the Lord said, if there be any praise, let it come to him.
Let it go to Calvary.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love what you said, Marilyn, that the Lord's not going to allow that. I feel like at this time, there is this righteous uprooting, right? There's this righteous exposure. And unfortunately, there's so many horrible things that are happening that allow for that exposure, but they are being exposed, right? And there's something about this time in particular where things are just being dug up and exposed, that it's forcing people to really face what's happening. Now they can choose to turn away, but they can't say, I didn't know.
Right.
If you were going to say along those lines, you've now seen yourself experiencing this thing, and the way that Questlove has captured it. Would there be, and this could be something, deeply meaningful or something silly, or it doesn't have to be, super significant, but was there something that didn't make the final cut that you remember and you thought, oh man, if people knew that, I'd really love for them to have known this happened at the festival? What would be something that didn't make the cut that we didn't see?
Well, there was a lot of the festival that we didn't get a chance to see either, because the Fifth Dimension was there, and we performed the songs that we did, and then there were more artists that were there to perform their songs, but then we had to go off
and work
somewhere else. So there was a lot of good music that we missed as well.
And then all the things that happened around that time, we couldn't tell you, because we were like Marilyn said, we were gone, and but I'm quite sure that there were some other beautiful things that happened around that they probably didn't even get on film.
Yeah, because I mean, Questlove is such a lover of. He's such a music historian. I'm sure that he picked the best of the offerings, because he knows so much about music.
So speaking of best of offerings and wonderful music, tell us a little bit about the plans for the new album, where we can get it, where we can listen to it, and what your hopes are for that.
Well, actually, I think that you can purchase that CD at Target and Amazon and Walmart.
Yeah. I mean, they're
online. You quite naturally for the young folks, they know how to get online and download and do all this stuff. We still learning this, but you can get it online, Amazon and places like that. But that's
it's
about
out there, and it's available. Barnes and Noble. Right. There are many places where it's available, and we're very excited about it. We're excited because we are seeing the response of the people who hear the music.
Right.
We're excited because they are it's accomplishing what we wanted it to accomplish.
Yes.
Which is to bring all of us together and to learn to respect one another's work and to love one another.
And we'll always be grateful to Kathy Allen, who and Jason Winter's company. They own EE1 and they're backed by BMG. So we got some big guns behind us, and so with all and a beautiful team we have. So everybody's heart is in this project. So we're really thankful for that.
Everybody that becomes a part of the project just becomes so involved and so committed to where it's going and why it's going there and what it's saying, and we're all there as such an excited part of it, and it's
Well,
just
people
amazing.
that are watching this, not just listening to it, can see above you the album cover.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I've, I have some vinyl, then I have CDs, and then now when I listen, we've lost that experience of album covers a little bit in the current music situation. But you've got on there just really striking. In the documentary, there's that point where they start talking about all the major civil rights leaders that lost their lives in the 60s.
Yes.
Now you have on this album cover a list of names of those who we've lost in recent past.
Exactly right.
Is this, obviously you're striking some parallels, but how do you think about that list of names as part of the people contributing to this work?
Well, I would say that list of names make people think about where we're at, what we've done, and where are we going, because I mean, we need to be reminded of these people. A lot of these people just lost their lives and for no reason. And a lot of people that we don't know about who've been lost their lives. So I think it's a beautiful thing to have that in front of us to remind us who we are and what we're all about.
One thing that I found really shocking, which is a part of the packaging of our project, is that it has a list of churches that were burned, that were bombed, lives that were lost of not even the famous civil rights people, but the quote unquote ordinary people who lost their lives just being in a church, wanting to come and worship the Lord. And I think it's important because people need to realize that these are some of the things that we've had to fight against. These are some of the struggles that have taken place. But these are also some of the ways that we can change the direction in which we've been going so that we can all benefit from a better life together.
Now, there's no way in the world we could think of all these things to put on the cover. That's why we have such a great team who's got their heart in the right place to be able to help put it out there.
Well, I think that's what makes for such a great creative project is when you collaborate with others who can really see and appreciate your vision in the same way that you do, and then bring it all to fruition.
Yes.
And then there's so much knowledge that's gone into the project too. We can't take credit for all of the knowledge. We've learned a lot in
ourselves,
in the process of this project being put together.
From all the research that they've done. Yeah.
So you may have just answered the question. But I'm going to ask it anyway, because our time is running out here. But our series is called In Real Life, REEL, but playing on film and then also in real life. And what I love about your music and then also your participation in this documentary and that festival is that in many ways you are asking your creativity to inform our everyday lives, what it means to be humans, what it means to be citizens, parents, brothers and sisters. And so I wonder if you could say, in real life, what is that sort of deeper spiritual conversation that your project is inviting us to have today?
Well, to me, it's like the Bible says when Jesus said, "I'll leave this one more commandment with you, is that you love one another as I have loved you." Love one another.
And I think that's a good challenge to everyone. There are a lot of people who feel like they are totally committed to the Lord and they're totally committed to their walk. And I feel like these are opportunities for you to really take a look at where you are. Take a look at how you approach the circumstances around you and how you deal with people who are saying things or doing things that are questionable or improper or should not be done. What do? Do you say something? Or are you afraid to say something? You stay quiet because you don't want to be judged. And how would the Lord take that? How are you going to explain that one day?
Well, that is, those are some great takeaways. Love one another, and perfect love casts out fear.
That's right.
Thank you. That is just, just perfect.
That's right.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for your music, for your lifetime of musical production, but also for coming back to people in our generation and blessing us once again, and challenging us with that word. Really appreciate it. Best of luck with the new album, and thank you so much for your work on the film. Jasmine, do you want to say anything to wrap us up?
You said it all, Kutter, but thank you so much. Challenge accepted. Right? I thought not just love our neighbor as we love ourselves, but love our neighbor as Jesus loved us, right? Yeah. Like that's an even greater challenge.
That's right.
Yeah. So challenge accepted.
That's right.
We wish you both.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
We wish you some continued success with your podcast.
That's right.
We think that you guys are starting off in a great way. We're the beginning. And
it's a perfect beginning.
With your questions and your hearts. And we just say, God bless you both.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And God bless you too.
All right. And thanks for having us.
Yes. Thank you both.